Roxbeck has finally been revealed. This is an incredibly monumental day, as Rox is a very special dish that Oda's been cooking in the story kitchen for about 6 years now. That's when we first learned his name anyway. However, the legacy of Rox is something that we have been setting up since practically the beginning of One Piece. So it was always going to feel surreal when Oda did finally reveal him, as this is quite possibly, arguably, the most influential pirate to have ever lived. But putting aside the Blackbeard lineage for now, we'll get to that. The craziest part of this to me initially is that Oda gave Rox the design of a Yu-Gi-Oh character. I was definitely not anticipating the spiky two-toned hair, and I'm half expecting him to whip out a dual disc and play an Egyptian god card at any moment. But look, let's address this Blackbeard stuff first, as we do not just have the first full reveal of Rox. That would have been enough for this chapter, but Oda said, nah mate, more. This chapter also comes with a DNA test confirming that Rox is the father of Marshall D. Teach. And look, I'm not going to pretend that this is the biggest shock in the world. Blackbeard has been connected to Rox for quite some time now as well. We just didn't know if it was a biological or inherited will sort of situation. But I mean this with no hyperbole. Knowing that Teach is Rox's son completely changes how I look at One Piece, because the entire pre-time skip era was framed by Blackbeard and Ace. These were the two characters whose actions directly led to the Paramount War and the reshaping of the power balance of the planet. The biological son of Rox and the biological son of Roger, both of whom were the spiritual sons of Whitebeard, and both of whom appear to have taken their mother's names, Portgas for Ace and Marshall for Teach. And just quickly on this, we have actually seen Blackbeard's mother before. In One Piece magazine, Oda revealed some sketches of Blackbeard's mother as well as his two sisters, which are ideas that may or may not have been scrapped for the actual series. But at the very least, this right here is the woman that Oda initially had in mind, who I am going to refer to as Marsha D. Teach. But everything that's happened in, One Piece in general, in the grand scheme of things, is just a continuation of this Rox-Roger rivalry, which in and of itself may be the continuation of some ancient rivalry from the days of the Void Century. But as far as we know, round 1 of this was won by Roger on God Valley, then round 2 was definitely won by Rox with his son killing Roger's son, and assumedly Luffy versus Blackbeard is going to be our round 3, the battle of the inherited wills and the climax of whatever cycle of fate is at play here. And that just floors me. I don't know how long the idea of Roxbeck specifically existed in Oda's mind, but from the very beginning, he has been constructing this extremely solid story structure. And to go back to Mr. Blackbeard, as far as we know, the 3 people who are most accountable for his father's death are Goldie Roger, Monkey D. Garp, and possibly Figgle and Garling. They were the 3 Rox opposing factions on God Valley, and the 3 people that Blackbeard has focused on most in this series just so happen to be Portgas D. Ace, Monkey D. Luffy, and Figgle and Shanks. Almost as if it's part of some revenge. I mean, look, Blackbeard went after Luffy after seeing his 100 million berry bounty. As far as we're led to believe, the number was much more important than the name, but I'm sure that the name Monkey D didn't get past him. And in the case of Ace, he actually got said revenge. And if Shanks is going to be killed by anyone in this series, mate, it is Blackbeard. That is just the direction that those two characters have been zooming in this entire time. And in the case of Whitebeard, we don't know how the God Valley incident played out, but Blackbeard may also have viewed him as partly responsible, which is why he could so easily betray someone who once called him a son if, say, Whitebeard betrayed Blackbeard's biological father. There is so much room for these threads to be tied off to perfection. This is such a clean reveal. And something I feel compelled to add is that Blackbeard's trademark laugh is typically spelled with a Z or a Z in our English translations. However, it is entirely possible that due to the way that Japanese works, his laugh is actually supposed to be with the exact same pronunciation, but with an X instead of a Z, using the first part of Zebek's name, keeping that little reference very secret, like the linguistic equivalent of a silhouette. Eiichiro Oda is, of course, the master of silhouettes, the crafter of the lurking legends in the shadows, emanating their legendariosity through the shadows of the legends and the shadows and the red rage shadow legends. The greatest, prettiest, punchiest, content-rich, pocket-based experience is now what we're talking about. What I genuinely love about Raid is the amount of champions and teams you can assemble. It hits me right in that sweet One Piece feeling of being able to build your own pirate crew. You are the captain and you have the authority to invite any number of these mad lads or indeed mad ladesses to assist you in becoming the Raid King. And in July, there's a particularly special one available through the Chaos Awakes event. This is Leminisi the Gold-wing, a counter character who removes enemy buffs, breaks through shields, and in some cases, just flat out ignores enemy defenses altogether. What's that? You have a shield? Who cares? Because I am a gold. Leminisi is a limited time free legendary who you can get by logging in for 7 days between July 3rd and August 20th. But look, Leminisi, she is phenomenal. However, she's available to everyone. And this month, what I've done right is I've asked Raid for something special just for Grand Line Review viewers. So if you download the game through my link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen, Raid will grant you the legendary champion Karato. And you can also redeem the code GETALICE to get one of my personal all-time favorite champions, Alice the Wanderer, complete with White Rabbit backpack. Or if she's not to your taste, then you have the option of Tholand, Foulbeard, Green, Warden, Rurak, or Tuhanarak, with their codes listed on screen. Plus, you can also come find me under the name Grand Line Review and join my clan, and just thank you so much to Raid for sponsoring this video, as it's because of supporters like them that we are able to bring you the best fictional pirate content possible as often as possible. And it's a win-win because it is a fantastic game. There is a reason why Raid has dominated the mobile market for the past 7 years now. So definitely check it out, but for now it's back to you, me. And with the reveal of Rox, we are entering some pretty serious, dangerous endgame territory here, and that's because we are now almost at the end of Silhouette Piece. Now that we know what Rox looks like, I think that Emu may be the only mysterious silhouetted character that we have remaining to explore, and that's if he's a silhouette at all. He may very well be one of these things, whatever the crap this is, like some sort of void entity. But other than Mr. Sir Emu, I can't think of anyone else that we're waiting on at the moment. We were very briefly waiting on the silhouette of Figlin's Shamrock to be revealed, but that happened like 10 chapters after we first saw it, and there is admittedly another mysterious character still to be revealed, being the man marked by flames, but we don't have a defined silhouette for him yet. So you know what this means right now. We essentially have all of the pieces, so we are ready to play the game. Oda's not actively hiding anything from us anymore, so in theory, he can just go all out with telling the story it is that he's been building towards. And one of the big meta questions that I have in this chapter in regards to Rox is why now? Yes, we've been waiting a long time, but why specifically now? And I cannot emphasize enough just how shocked I am to see him in this chapter. I did expect Rox to appear in this flashback, but I did not expect to actually see him, if that makes sense. Typically, Oda only reveals silhouetted characters once he's ready to fully explore them, like say Kozuki Oden. We only saw him for the first time at the beginning of his flashback, but this doesn't feel like the beginning of some sort of extended Rox story. Not that I'd be complaining if it was, but it is still very firmly planted as part of the Harold Loki story, and that is where the light bulb went off for me. We're seeing Rox right here, right now, because we need to know just how important he is to Loki. Because in a strange and twisted way, Rox is kind of being positioned as the flashback mentor of Loki. And at the end of this chapter, you've got Loki at his absolute lowest. He actually casts himself back into the underworld in what I believe is an attempt to take his own life, which I think is a moment in this chapter that's going to go heavily underrated, just because it's impossible to ignore the revelation of Rox. But not only did Loki try to remove himself from the world, he did so in the exact same way that his mother saw fit, and he may even have landed in the exact same spot that Estrid tossed him as a baby. It's incredibly heartbreaking. He has tears in his demonic eyes, and just, mate, there is no hope for him in this world. All Loki wants to do in this moment is die. And as it turns out, he's such a failure of an existence that he can't even do that. Those are Loki's thoughts, not my thoughts to be clear. But then, suddenly, Loki sees the man who sparks his will to live. From what we already know, Rox is certainly a reluctant mentor who probably wants nothing to do with Loki at all. But because Rox is such a foundational aspect of Loki's life, a silhouette would have made for some pretty weak storytelling. Because if we're going to go into Loki's perspective, then we need to see what Loki sees in Rox. His strength, his charm, his charisma, his ideas, his everything. It is all necessary to understand Loki. And just to get a bit wanky for a minute, I do think it's pretty cool that the first time that we as readers see Rox is after Loki takes off his blindfold. Almost as if that's what was obscuring our view of him. It's all very well done. And other than Rox himself, the massive reveal in this chapter is that apparently Roxbeck killed a Marine Admiral during a reverie that took place 56 years ago. That is the Gomu number, which makes Rox one of the extremely rare historical figures to have defeated a Marine Admiral. At the moment, the company he shares is with Sakazuki, who beat Kuzan, although to be fair, he was also an admiral. And more recently, it can be argued that Luffy defeated Kizaru on Egghead Island, but also not, and that's a whole different discussion. Now, as for who this admiral was, we have no real idea, and that is a difficulty created by the time period. 56 years ago, as it turns out, was a very landmark year for the Marines, because that was the year when Sengoku, Suru, and a certain Monkey D. Garp enlisted. They were rookie sailors 56 years ago when Rox killed this admiral. So it predates a lot of what we know about the history of the Marines, although we can potentially link these events to one man. Prior to Sengoku, Kong was the fleet admiral of the Marines, and so he was also an admiral at one point, and he could have been a colleague of the admiral that got killed, which would have sent colossal shockwaves through the entire organization. Remember that the three admirals are representative of the stability and power of the entire fleet. So if you lose one of them, it's like losing a third of your overall forces. And mate, this took place at a reverie. These events are absolute nightmares. Did they ever go well? I don't think so. But this location is such an extremely important detail because the obvious question that we now need to ask is, why was a Rox at a reverie? Did he sneak in like the Revolutionary Army did at the most recent reverie? Was he perhaps affiliated with the World Government Kingdom like how the Tontada got into that reverie? Or is Rox actually royalty and he attended as a king? The reason why I bring up that last one is all because of Blackbeard's most immediate goal, which is something that I've been struggling to make sense of. Blackbeard wants to be recognized as a world government nation. He wants to be officially crowned as a king, which to me has always seemed like such a short-sighted goal for a man who assumedly also wants to become the pirate king and have his way with the entire planet. But then again, if that's his lineage, if Rox himself was a king, then Blackbeard could just be wanting to restore what's rightfully his. And this does also shed some light on the words of St. J. Garcia Satin, a man who was formerly alive and now very dead. And in chapter 1107, Katarina Devon claimed that Teach was special, to which Satin replied, as is his bloodline. And Katarina Devon was surprised that Satin was aware of this. So when this chapter came out, this initially led to the theory that Blackbeard may have been a buccaneer because he's a big boy. He's much bigger than Rox is depicted, that's for sure. But it now seems very possible that Saint Satin, and by extension the rest of the Elder Stars, actually knew that Blackbeard is the son of Rox, which would make it all the more insane that they ever would have considered making him a warlord of the sea. Although to be fair to them, maybe they found out afterwards. And they do also have a history of rather successfully assimilating former enemies, as we can see through Garp, so it might have just been a piece of hubris on their part. But one unfortunate effect that this chapter may have had, though, is killing the Roxy Buggy theory, which was a very fun and not unsound idea that Buggy could have been the son of Rox. And I didn't personally make this, but a denizen of the internet pointed out something quite interesting, which is that when you split Xebec's face down the middle, half of it looks like Blackbeard and half of it looks like Buggy. So look, I'm not gonna write Buggy off entirely here. As far as I'm aware, One Piece does not have a one-child policy, so for now, the dream remains alive. But something else I'd really like to note is the composition of the Rox pirates that we see in this chapter. It's a very interesting group of people, and it may be that this was some sort of select advance party, but I'd like to think that what we see here, was the full crew at this point in history. There's something about seeing Rox, Whitebeard, Shiki, and Buckingham Stussy together that gives me some real East Blue and early Grand Line nostalgia for the Straw Hats. Just a very small group of pirates adventuring around the world in the infancy of building their infamy. So let's look at the time period that this took place in, which was 48 years ago. And firstly, that is exactly 10 years before the God Valley incident. And this is actually the year where Charlotte Katakuri, Daifuku, and Oven, the second son triplets, were born. And I could be very wrong about this, but I believe that this was before Big Mom joined the Rox Pirates. Although the absolutely wild thing about Charlotte Lin is that no matter when she joins the Rox Pirates, she fell pregnant several times during their journeys. And actually, 38 years ago when the God Valley incident took place, that was the year that Charlotte Montdor was born. So she may even have been pregnant during the God Valley incident itself. But one thing I can say for certain is that Kaido was not a member of the crew at this point, as 46 years ago is when the Vodka Kingdom sold Kaido to the Marines 2 years after this chapter takes place, and that also happened to be the year where Big Mom gave birth to the Charlotte quintuplets, and then 44 years ago is when Kaido was prompted by Whitebeard to join the Rocks Pirates, which is also the year that Big Mom gave birth to Charlotte Zukoto. This woman is never not pregnant, which does make you wonder how many of the fathers may also have been Rocks Pirates members. And to jump around a bit here, having mentioned Kaido, I've got to bring Loki back up again, because Loki jumping into the underworld is extremely reminiscent of Kaido jumping from the balloon terminal Sky Island in an attempt to see if he could end his own life, which, as it turns out, he couldn't. And it makes a lot of sense that Loki possesses these same abilities, because they've both got this very, very potent dose of ancient giant DNA. And one thing that I was hoping to, but not expecting to see in this flashback was the birth of Kaido, something to tie all of this ancient giant stuff together, but he was born 59 years ago, so he does get born somewhere in the time period covered by this chapter, but it looks like we won't be addressing it. But I suppose the overall point that I was originally talking about is that this may have been the romance dawn of the Rocks Pirates. The early days of just a handful of crew members before all the other names joined, like Captain John, Ochoku, Silverax, Gilbuster, and everyone else came aboard to threaten the stability of the world. But also, one of the really trippy parts about seeing the Rocks Pirates on Elbaf is that we get more of Mr. Golden Lion Shiki, which I always appreciate. But there's a very fascinating meta interaction with having him on Elbaf, and specifically in the underworld, because that's where all of Loki's animal friends are. And I've talked about this in other videos and probably will in future videos as well, but all of these animals are designed refugees from One Piece film Strong World, the film in which Shiki was the main antagonist of. In that movie, he was he succeeded in rapidly evolving these animals into a legion of super creatures to destroy the East Blue. And we recently learned from the SBS of volume 112, which I'll have a full video on coming out soon, that Oda reused the animal designs on Elbaf because he saw them as the perfect result of what would happen on an island where only the strong survived, and that he may or may not have also admitted to getting a little bit lazy. Whatever happened, it is so weird to see young Shiki on the same page as the animals that old Shiki created. I love that he's here, but for weird Australian men on the internet, there's a bit of a strange and distracting meta disconnect happening there. But hey, if we want to go ahead and try to make some sense of it, what we could say is that this is where Shiki was inspired. He saw the animals of Elbaf and later on would try to recreate their strength. For now, I'm going to go ahead with that and we'll call it case closed, which is exactly what I can not say for the rest of the chapter. Because so far, I have spent a ton of time talking about Rocks and Blackbeard and other Rocks adjacent topics, but that is only because this is such a landmark event in One Piece history. If there is a more impactful lore chapter that drops this year, then we are in for one of the best years in recent history. But there's a lot more to talk about here, and another aspect that's being criminally ignored is the lore drop of this ancient giant shipwright clan that seemed to have a suspiciously similar name to a certain GLR and may or may not have been frozen. Something that we can practically confirm because we've seen at least 2 of those ancient giants before on the island of Punk Hazard in a rather creepy and frozen cavern, and we'll be diving more into the details of this group as well as all of the other extremely important chapter content in the next video.